Hi, it's Phoenix again, and I'm going to conclude the second part of my little talk on what could be called the philosophy of intelligence. Um, I would first like to start off by talking about what I see as a link between creativity and intelligence. There's a book on physics written by Michio Kaku, who wrote a book called Beyond Einstein, which basically describes how, or according to Michio, that the best physicists are people who have outlandish and crazy ideas. Now, on first glance, we think basically it's just people that can come up with preposterous ideas that have no bearing on anything. And yet, if you look deeper into what Michio is actually saying, what he's saying is that essentially it's people that can be very creative and novel in their way of looking at old problems to be able to brainstorm solutions to um, problems that have always been there. And essentially, what he's saying is that there's a strong link between creativity and intelligence, and or even just the ability to be a good physicist. And I think that that's super important. Um, I feel like a lot of the times we take creativity for granted. We assume that creativity has no function, creativity has no purpose, but that doesn't seem fair because you know creativity is extremely important for problem solving. And when we think of creativity, we think of just splattering paint on a canvas. But creativity is a lot more than that, and there seems to be a strong link between creativity and intelligence. Um, so second, I would like to talk about how I read a story called Bicycles, Muscles, and Cigarettes by the writer Raymond Carver. And essentially, the story is very interesting because there's these two characters, if I remember correctly, these two boys who start crying because their two fathers physically fight each other. And so I have a claim on intelligence, which is basically the idea that rather than looking at things simply literally and simply superficially, we look at things thematically. So I'm going to go back to this in a second, but essentially nowadays when we look at certain events that happen, we look at it literally. There's no analysis. We don't look at it thematically, and essentially we assume that you know looking up themes and metaphors is something that English majors should do. Looking up themes is something that only art historians should do, and that doesn't seem fair. And I'm going to tell you why. So in the story, if you look at that example that I mentioned of the two kids crying, what you would see if you analyze it superficially is the two kids crying. That's all you would see. But if you analyze it thematically, what you realize is that the kids are crying because they're traumatized because of what they've seen and because it hurts to see their two fathers fighting like that. And it also brings up themes of innocence, themes of love and compassion. And the question I would like to pose to you, whoever is out there, is the idea of why would it be useful to look at any situation that happens thematically? How could that be a form of intelligence? Why would it be beneficial to read between the lines rather than look at things literally? It's just a question I would like to pose to you, something to think about, and I hope that you can find the answer. Because in my experience, I believe it's made my life richer to be able to look at these themes and to be able to analyze these things on a deeper level rather than just looking at it as, oh, great, so this happened and that's it. So the next thing I would like to talk about is this idea of expression and expressiveness as dead. So there tends to be this view in the 21st century that anything that is expressive, anything that is expression, is essentially meaningless. And the logical positivists, such as Bertrand Russell and not Wittgenstein, he inspired the logical positivists, but Wittgenstein in a sense, as well as Rudolf Carnap and others, they would say that you're right. And they would say that you're right that expression is meaningless because there's no theoretical content. Essentially, in expression, such as a poem, such as a novel, such as a play, there is only expression and nothing more. Because there's no theoretical content, and because especially when you get to metaphysics, you can't see something in a poem, for instance, that is basically representing reality as it is, basically representing the sensory world, and it's not empirical and it's not logical. And essentially, in my opinion, I think that many people have taken this opinion of the logical positivists to its extreme. So we think that the only thing that's useful is something that can be measured empirically and something that has some kind of logical coherence. And that doesn't seem fair, because when you look at poems, poems serve a different function than just being scientific. And, and I feel like, in my opinion, expression is important for what it can do, not for what it doesn't do. And one of the things that it can do is definitely allow a person to feel, as a friend of mine once said. It opens the imagination, it broadens the imagination. There are so many things that you can get out of expression. And I wanted to say that I feel like what's been taken for granted about personal expression, such as a poem, is that essentially in our kind of cutthroat society, we see expression as useless, and we see the expression of somebody else as useless. Why would we want to sit down and write a novel that our 50-year-old next door neighbor wrote? Why would we care? And I think that's because we take the idea of the logical positivist to the extreme. We assume that there's no value in expression because it's just metaphysical and because it's outside of experience and all of these reasons. And I think that that is completely unfair. And I don't think that it's accurate. And I in fact think that because we have this opinion, even in the art world and in worlds of, the world of poetry, and I've experienced this personally, in the world of poetry and literature, there tends to be this idea that, if your expression doesn't fit the mold, then your expression is meaningless. And there's no conversation about what the expression actually is. And it seems to be because there's no way to necessarily prove what, to prove what makes something good or what makes something bad. And so everything gets tossed up to subjectivity. And I think that's a major pitfall in thinking about something like expression. And again, as I've said before, as much as I appreciate the analytic philosophers like Russell, I think that it does a disservice to the importance of expression. So think about it very seriously whenever you write a poem because you just have all of these emotions and all of this angst and all of this stress, and you just want to get it out on paper. Think about why that's meaningful or why it's meaningless. And I think that you're going to realize that it's meaningful because it's at least meaningful to you. And by extension, why couldn't it be meaningful to other people? So essentially, don't let the extreme version of the logical positivists, make your expression null and void. Lastly, what I'd like to say is I have this idea that if people are allowed to explore their intelligence at their own pace and explore knowledge and whatever they're interested in at their own level, without worrying about economic needs, without worrying about putting food on the table and all of that, I personally feel like we would live in a much more productive society. The problem is society doesn't care about that. All we care about these days are results. And so if you're out, sitting by a tree like Wordsworth and writing poetry, nobody's going to care. And that's because we live in an empirical society. But my claim is that what Wordsworth is doing, or what writers nowadays like Wordsworth are doing, is actually very meaningful. We just don't realize that because, like I said, we demand results. We want results now. A friend of mine once said that he appreciated that I write so much rather than shovel popcorn. And I think that his point is apt, whether you agree with it or not, just in the sense that what he's getting at is that life is about a lot more than results. And making a true contribution is about being able to follow your own interests and your own abilities. And I'm sure many people would disagree. We already do. This is indeed a controversial subject. The problem with my vision of allowing everybody to explore their own paths in the intellectual field is that it's economically unviable, it's impossible, it is basically a utopian ideal. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't consider that as a possibility at the very least, and that we shouldn't take it more seriously. Just something to think about. And again, my name is Phoenix, and thank you for your time.